Hello and welcome to Springboot Easy, the course where I will attempt to teach the Spring Boot fundamentals in a really easy way. I'm recording this at 2:55 p.m. CST. Who am I? I am Diary Boy, or at least I have been for the last 15 minutes when I came up with this name. I am a software engineer with 4 years of engineering experience, so I'm really doubling down on the engineering word here. I've worked with Spring throughout my career as a backend engineer. I've even worked with WebSphere. So if you don't know what WebSphere is, that's a very good thing. So +1. What is this course and who's it for? So it's essentially for people interested in learning the Spring Boot fundamentals, essentially reviewing the Spring Boot documentation. This is going to be a lecture heavy course. I think, if you come across a lot of Spring Boot courses, it's a lot of, project based examples. This is going to be a lecture heavy course where you attempt to kind of understand the fundamentals. We'll build projects, in the later course. So why this course over others? Depth is the main reason. So most courses lead with a practice project rather than the fundamentals. So the goal of this course is to go over the Spring Boot documentation at a somewhat high level. There will be follow-up courses where we will dig deeper into particular subjects at the intermediate level, and even deeper at an advanced level. So, right. If you've, come across one of these courses before, they're probably led by some Indian god like Abdul Bari, who's kind of an OG in the DSA space, right? But one of my core critiques of not Abdul Bari, but other Spring Boot applications, Spring Boot courses, is that it's too much too fast, right? Or it's either too much too fast, or you don't really learn how Spring works, right? In one case, you're talking about auto configuration in the second video, and you're like, well, what the hell is auto configuration? What the hell is the bean? What the hell is the application context? You're just kind of throwing things at me, maybe giving like one word answers or one few sentences as per defining what these are. And I don't really understand. Or, you're creating a CRUD based application and, you're using all these different annotations. By annotation, I just mean, this @ symbol and some sort of text, but, you're building JPA integration, authentication flow. So you have an understanding of the utility of Spring Boot, but you don't really know how this works, right? If you don't know how the @Spring Boot application annotation works. If I said it's a meta annotation, you don't really know what that means. If I asked you what enable auto configuration is, I don't know how many people would, talk to me about. Some people might say, you're examining the class path and then configuring your application context based on the dependencies available within the class path. But how does that really work? What is the, bean factory? What does that enable? What is the application context? How are these two things related? So these are the kind of questions we want to really ask ourselves. If I were to ask you, you have an application context. What is the difference between, how does that change if you introduce a, Spring Data Web into your application? That dependency, if you have multiple application contexts, what is the relationship between those application contexts, right? So again, all of these sort of fundamental things that people, or these kind of courses don't cover, we're going to attempt to cover in this course, all right? So why this course over others? It's going to be fun. I know my voice doesn't convey a lot of fun, but I think this is going to be a relatively fun course, and I hope you have a good time. Crack a lot of jokes, and they're all going to bomb, by the way. That's what my people are known for. Boom. See, every joke or right to the gutter. Anyway, depth. Yeah, we're going to talk about things that are fairly deep, at a fairly deep level. We're not going to go all the way. Pause. That's what she said. Continue. But we're gonna, when we touch a particular subject, we're gonna try to tackle that subject in a meaningful way. Yeah. Accessibility. I want this course to be accessible. So I want people to, go through the course and not find it easy, but relatively simple to follow. I want, if you have questions, I'll make myself readily available to answer any and all questions. I just want to build a course that, everyone can, take something away from. So with that being said, let's get started. We're going to cover a handful of questions today. But this is only the start. I provide this link because, in a lot of other courses that I've taken, I really enjoy when an instructor shares his notes. I'm not going to do that because I'm going to pull everything from the Spring Boot documentation. So please reference these docs if you have any questions, and, just familiarize yourself with the docs in general, right? If you look at the docs and you look at the course listing, you'll see that, I'm really just following maybe, segment by segment what's being covered in the documentation. Let's start here. So what is the difference between Spring and Spring Boot? My goal is that you understand that Spring Boot is a child, an opinionated child of Spring. Essentially said, okay, Spring does all these great things, but it is hard to get up and go quickly. And I need to do a lot of, wiring in order to get this running. I don't want to have to go through any of that hassle. I just want to be able to, start a server immediately and just, add my business logic and, move forward. And that's that's what Spring Boot enables, right? Well, what are some of the differences? Let's, talk about that here. What problems of Spring does Spring Boot attempt to solve for? And there are a handful of things here. One of them is an extensive XML configuration, right? Back in the day, it was a lot worse. I think it's, improved dramatically, but, back in the day, there was like an @bean tag that you'd have to define manually and manage manually, and they'd have some sort of bugs, and in which context is defined, you'd have all sorts of issues, right? That was really hard. What else? So manual dependency management. Spring Boot has a plugin that allows you to manage dependencies. So if I'm saying something that is maybe a little bit different, let me take a step back here. So let me talk about the XML configuration a little bit. If you don't know what XML is, it's kind of, maybe you've heard of JSON. It's similar to JSON. Let's say it's we'll see this in action later on, but it's a means of like conveying information, mostly used for like build definitions, right? So it consists of like a lot of tags similar to like what you might see like HTML that are used for defining like configuration for a Spring Boot application, right? And you'd have to come in and you'd have to change segments of the JSON file, let's say, in order to get your application running correctly. And this was challenging. The other point is the manual dependency management. Okay, I'm running out of space. That's fine. Manual dependency management. So Spring Boot, for example, let's say I'm running Spring Boot at 3.4 and I have, 3 dependencies, 1, 2, and 3. Each of these has their own version. So this will be 1.0, this will be 7.2, this will be 9.3. I don't want to, manage these dependencies myself because later on, let's say that there's a new version of dependency number 2. I'll update this to 7.3, but this is not incompatible with the Spring Boot version. I don't have to deal with that kind of hassle, right? This is, extremely time consuming, and Spring Boot kind of handles that for us now, right? Some dependencies are classified as blessed dependencies, and these are kind of the most common dependencies, right? More often than not, 99% of the time you're using a blessed dependency. So what Spring Boot will do is essentially say, hey, you're running 3.4, I'm going to pull down the dependencies, these dependencies in the version that's applicable, right? So you don't need to really add a version at all. Spring Boot will manage this for you on your behalf, right? That's another, big win for Spring Boot. Yeah, the other one that we shared before is that it's difficult to set up quickly. Not that it takes a long time, but Spring Boot is like so fast. You press a few buttons, you define your dependencies, and you're off to the races, right? With that being said, okay, let's discuss this third question, which is, how does Spring Boot go? So by go, I just mean, how does Spring Boot run? How can I run and deploy my application? You can do one of two ways. So you can either say it's a Java jar executable or as a traditional war deployment. What is a war, right? Let me erase some of these notes things here. So these are essentially archive file formats. Archive file format. It's similar to if you've ever seen like a zip file or a file, right? These are essentially a way of combining multiple files. So like, let's say I have 1 and 2 into just simply like one file, right? The reason you do this is for easier storage, like distribution, script, let's just say, and compression, right? So that's essentially it. If you can examine a jar file, you can inspect it, you'll see a litany of different files, similar to zip. If you've ever opened a zip file, right? You see a folder structure, and that folder contains like, 80, 90 files. And that's because it's been dramatically, because if you want to send it over the wire, over the network, that's a lot faster to send a zip file than it is to send 50 files one after the next. Okay. But what are some of the other differences between jar files and war files? Or the war format versus the jar format, let's say. So jars are general purpose for Java applications. It can be executed by simply running java -jar and then, whatever the name is here, .jar file, right? So it's an executable essentially. But for a war file, this is a little different, right? This is specifically for web applications. If you are a newcomer to Spring, you're probably thinking to yourself, web applications. That's right. You can build a Java full stack application, and that used to be kind of the norm back in the day. If you're like early 2006, 2007, right? You build full stack applications with the Java. So they must be deployed to Java web/application servers, right? You can't just run these as a executable. Yeah, you can execute them with the Java command essentially. So jar files, more differences here. Could run standalone with the JVM. So again, this is the same thing really that we said before, right? Yeah, you can run it as an executable so long as you have the JVM on your machine. JVM stands for the Java Virtual Machine. If you don't know, it is responsible in part in translating your bytecode into machine code. It acts as a intermediary between your machine. You have a top layer, which is a Java Virtual Machine. Then here is your application. There's a lot more layers here. This often gets, reduced into this kind of simplistic view, but there's a lot of depth here. JVM is really, really large. And, we'll talk about JDK all together and all the components at a later point, and JVM is a part of that. But just know that for now, for a jar file, you can run a jar file so long as you have a JVM on your machine, right? And if you ever downloaded any JDK version, if you have an SDK man on your machine, for example, and you have Java 17, then you have the JVM on your machine, right? Because that's a segment. What else? So WAR applications are for web applications only. I think we said that already. Jar applications, again, can run directly. WAR must be deployed to a server. Yeah, okay. So with that being said, let's do a little bit of summarization here. Summary. So as we shared previously, what are some of the goals of Spring Boot, or what problems does Spring Boot solve for? Just want to kind of go through these things again. So the big winner and the number one reason why it was adopted is just a faster start. This is like the biggest win of Spring Boot. You could get going faster. This is why it won, right? Not that there's a winner, but if you see a Spring application get knitted today, it's more than likely that it's a Spring Boot application, not a Spring application. It's opinionated, there's an A here, right? But flexible. So for its opinionated, it takes it'll auto-wire, or let me not use words that perhaps are confusing. It will configure your application and build your application in a particular way, but you can opt out of those things and provide your own configurations if you want. This is a big win, right? So it's opinionated by default, but you can opt out of those takes and define your own configurations for how you want things to be built, right? This is a really major unlock here as well. The last one is it provides a lot of non-functional features. Again, my handwriting will get better, sorry. But what does that mean? It provides a lot of non-functional features out of the box. Something like embedded servers is not something that you need to define outright, right? So it automatically gets one up and running on your behalf. Another one is security, metrics, health checks. Oh my God, that was the worst one yet. Externalized configuration. Well, we'll have videos kind of discussing all of these. So let me put servers here. We'll have videos discussing all of these and what they are. So I don't expect you to know what externalized configuration is. We'll come back to that, but just know that, these are not things that are normally so simple to set up, and they require, at least to some extent, some sort of manual effort. And the fact that you don't need to do that is really remarkable. For example, if you introduce kind of a security package dependency to your application, all of your APIs immediately fall into a protected state, right? And that's really phenomenal, because now you have to opt out of protecting particular APIs and kind of, manage your routing and your security. But that's remarkable, right? Metrics, for example, there are so many metrics that are provided by default, and they already publish those metrics to, for example, Prometheus or Influx, and you can display those metrics really simply with a few simple integration points. They have all of that set up for you. That's remarkable. Health checks we talked about previously. Externalized configuration. I think understanding the utility of externalized configuration requires that you understand some of the faults of internalized configuration. So we'll come back to this, but know that this is also a huge unlock. All right, so that is all for this video. Thank you for listening. I hope that this course will be beneficial and that people will be able to take something away from this course. So yeah, thank you so much, and I will see you on the next one.